Very good. So we're making that announcement on the other one. Good.
Did you start it?
Mm-hmm. Very good. All right. Namaste. Welcome everyone to our live stream. I am Dharma Acharya, and again, we apologize for a little bit of technical difficulty. The previous stream that we had, for some reason, just would not work regardless of anything that we tried. So we're now on this new live stream. It looks like people are very quickly figuring that out and joining us. So that's very good. Thank you very much for joining us. This is only our second time doing this. We did this several weeks ago, and we are going to attempt to do a live stream approximately every month or so, something like that. And it will vary as to which day and which time, etc. But thank you all very much for joining us. Hopefully people can hear. If you can, if someone can please in the live chat, please let us know that they can hear my voice and what I'm saying. That would be very much appreciated. And just to let you know, as we did last time, I'm going to be giving first a little bit of a talk, and then after that, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. We'll try to leave approximately 15-20 minutes, more or less, toward the end for questions and answers. So what I would very humbly request is that you please save your questions for then. Because if you start asking questions now, I'm probably not even going to see them because I'm going to be focusing on my talk. So I'll let you know when you can. Please feel free to ask any questions that you have. And before we begin, I will just start first with a mantra recitation, and then we're going to be looking at a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So with that, let us begin. And if you know the Narayana mantra, please feel free to follow along at home. Om Namo Narayanaya. Om Namo Jaya Srimad Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this live stream. And like last time, if you were not here last time, I commented on a very beautiful verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. The actual video of that live stream is available on Dharma Nation, on our Dharma Nation channel, so please feel free to take a look at the recording of that if you haven't seen that yet. And for today, again, we are going to be looking at a different verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. I love the Srimad Bhagavatam. It is one of my favorite of all Vedic scriptures for several reasons. First of all, it is the Purana of Bhagavata. In other words, it is a Purana, one of 18 major Puranic texts that focuses very specifically and intimately on what is the nature of God. So for this reason, it is considered to be the most important of all the Puranas. The Srimad Bhagavatam, or Bhagavata Purana, it's sometimes called, itself is truly, truly beautiful. It is comprised of many things: stories, sacred conversations between various people, history, prayers, poetry, just so much that is there. So if you ever have a chance, please get a copy of the Srimad Bhagavatam and feel free to take a look at that. But the verse that we're going to look at today is very specifically from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 5, and verse 16. And I believe in the description we have the verse there if you want to take a look at it. Otherwise, feel free at any point to look at it yourself if you have a copy of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So again, Canto 2, Chapter 5, verse 16. Narayana paro yogo, Narayana param tapah, Narayana param jnanam, Narayana paragati. That is the verse in the Sanskrit, and I will read the English, and then we'll go through this very profound, very important verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is the verse. All different types of yoga are means for realizing Narayana. All austerities are aimed at achieving Narayana. The culture of transcendental knowledge is for getting a glimpse of Narayana, and ultimate salvation is entering the kingdom of Narayana. And that is the verse. Very beautiful, very profound verse. And you can see where we got the name for this talk that I am giving today, the Kingdom of Narayana, since this verse ends with this. Well, let me comment on this verse a little bit. First of all, you'll see that it mentions Narayana again and again and again, several times. And for individuals who have attended my talks in the past, either in person or online, you've seen videos of my talks on YouTube, you will remember that I have said many, many times that in the Vedic scriptures, there are several very crucial, very important ways of understanding and interpreting exactly what the Vedic scriptures are saying. And this is one element that you find in several places where there is repetition, where something is repeated in a verse several times, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. Usually not more than that. Usually the most that you'll hear something repeated is about 3 times. And when something is of crucial importance, you can tell that that is the case because the scripture is repeating it several times for emphasis. Well, in this particular case, amazingly, this verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam is repeating this 4 times, the name of Narayana, again and again. Of course, like with any literature, you don't have to repeat. Because once you say the primary subject name, it's understood that that's who you're referring to. However, again, this verse chooses to repeat the name Narayana once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, for emphasis. Thus, to emphasize the fact of who this verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam is referring to. So it's referring to Narayana. Well, who or what is Narayana? For those individuals who don't know, I'll just give a little bit of an explanation, not very in-depth, because of course we have other videos where I talk about this more in-depth, what is the nature of Narayana. But Narayana is one of the names of God, one of the many names of God that is mentioned in the Vedic scriptures. In the Sri Vishnu Sahasranama, for example, this is one Vedic scripture that is appended to the Mahabharata, where it has the 1,000 names of Vishnu, the 1,000 names of God. In actuality, those are the primary names. There are actually more names of God than just 1,000. In fact, it's been said many times that there are infinite names of God. There is no limit to how many names of God there are. But of the many names of God, Narayana is one of these names that is mentioned. And again throughout the totality of the Vedic scriptures, it explains that not only is this a name of God, not only is it a primary name of God, but it is the most important name of God. So again, this is mentioned in Mahabharata itself, it's mentioned in the Narayana Upanishad, it's mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam, in other verses, it's mentioned in many places, that Narayana is the name of God. Now, why is this the case? Well, let's look at what this name is actually saying. And to back up for a moment, this is why there are so many names of God, is because each of these names is pointing to an aspect of God, pointing to an attribute, pointing to a feature of God that is of importance that we're meant to then meditate upon by contemplating that name of God. So again, this is why there are so many names of God and why there are really infinite names. But getting back to this name, Narayana, there are several interpretations of the name itself, but the one that is most prevalent, that's found in the scriptures themselves, in the Manava Dharma Shastra, that is recorded by many of the Acharyas of the past, is very simply this. Narayana means the sustainer of all beings. Nara meaning either man or mankind or beings, living beings. And Ayana meaning the foundation or the sustainer. Thus, Narayana means that absolute God who is the sustainer of all beings. Now, why is this of crucial importance that the name Narayana means this very specifically? Well, this is a very Vedantic commentary on the nature of God. That is, that how do we know what is God? How do we even know what is God? You know, anything, any person can claim that they are God. You can say that the air is God. You can say fire is God. In fact, interestingly, it's been said that with the pre-Socratic philosophers, several of them made such statements. Some of them believed that fire was the most important of all things in the universe, and some believed water, etc., etc. Well, the thing is, with this broad general speculation about what is the nature of God, how do you know what is the nature of God? Well, there are several features that God has and that only God can have. One of these features, for example, is being the source of all things. There's only one source of all things. And anything that is not the source of all things, by default, you know is not God. Thus, this is why, for example, as Vaishnavas, as personalists, as individuals who practice bhakti yoga and who wish to know God in the highest, this is how we know that we're not God. Because however either egotistical or spiritually egotistical we may be, however much we may think, oh, I am God, as some unfortunate individuals think who claim to be spiritual, I am not the source of all things. And you are not the source of all things, guaranteed. We are not the source of all things, but God is the source of all material and spiritual realities. So this is one Vedantic way in which we know what truly is God. Another way in which we know what truly is God is that being who is the sustainer of all reality, without whom all of reality would fall into non-existence. That's God. And again, I am not the sustainer of all reality. You are not the sustainer of all reality. Some people, some of us can barely sustain ourselves. What to speak of others? What to speak of a family? What to speak of a nation? What to speak of a world? What to speak of all worlds? Thus, we are not God. We are servants of God. But this is how we know who truly is God. Thus, this is what this name of God, Narayana, means. The sustainer of all beings. So now, with that understanding, let's go through this verse a little bit, please. So, Narayana Paro Yogo. This is the first sentence of this shloka. All different types of yoga are means for realizing who, again, the Sanskrit makes it very clear, Narayana. Thus, what does this mean? Well, as those of us who are on the Vedic path know, the Vedic path consists of several different things. Certainly it consists of philosophy, and for many of us, of course, myself included, that was our first approach to Vedic spirituality, was through the philosophical profundity that we found in reading the Vedic scriptures, and in the amazing, absolutely wonderful and cogent answers that were given to us by reading the Vedic scriptures. So this is one way in which we approach spiritual realization on the Vedic path, but then practically speaking, ultimately, we practice yoga. For any individual who is on the Vedic path, and to the point where it doesn't even matter which, let's say, marga you follow, whether you're a Vaishnava, whether you're Shaiva, whether you are an impersonalist, personalist, etc., etc. If you are a practitioner of the Vedic path, you must practice yoga. It means that you are practicing yoga. Of course, yoga in what sense? Not yoga in the modern American sense, that's for sure. Not yoga meaning merely asanas, meaning going to a local yoga studio where they turn the temperature up to 120 degrees and just getting sweaty, etc., etc. Not going to Lululemon. That's not what we are talking about when we speak of yoga. Of course, in the Vedic context, in the traditional and authentic Vedic context, when we are speaking of yoga, we're talking about that spiritual praxis, that spiritual practical path by which we refine who and what we are via practices that are revealed in the Vedic scriptures and by great liberated masters of the past. That is the path of yoga. Period. So thus, if you're a serious Vedic practitioner, you are practicing yoga. You are practicing that path of union, which is what yoga means. Union, that is restoring, really realizing our communion with God, our unity with other beings, etc. And ultimately our unity within ourselves. This is what is yoga. So now, with that understanding, there are, even authentically speaking, several different kinds of yoga. Really, truthfully, there is one yoga system that has several different facets, but that's a topic for another talk that would be much longer, maybe in the future. But even Vedically speaking, forgetting about modern yoga, which is mostly concocted, looking at authentic Vedic yoga, there are indeed several different paths that are there. And interestingly, the Srimad Bhagavatam makes this very pertinent statement about the nature of yoga itself. All different types of yoga are means for realizing Narayana. Thus, the ultimate goal of yoga, of any legitimate yoga, either directly or indirectly, is ultimately to know God. That's the purpose of yoga. The purpose of yoga certainly is not, again, what a lot of modern, more New Age types would think. It's not merely to gain a very flexible body. Oh, you'll have that if you practice yoga. That's not the goal. The goal of yoga is not merely to have peace of mind. Oh, you will have that if you practice yoga, but that's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is not even merely self-realization. This is indeed one of the goals of yoga, Atma-jnana, what is called Atma-jnana in the Sanskrit, or self-realization. This is a preliminary goal of yoga, and this is what Patanjali talks about very in depth in the Yoga Sutras very specifically. But even self-realization is not the ultimate goal of yoga. And why? To state this very briefly and in Cartesian terms, that is in accordance also with René Descartes, who also recognized this. We can indeed come to a very good understanding of what is the nature of our true self, but then ultimately, if we are wise, we will ask this ultimate question. Now, knowing myself, what is that self of myself? In other words, what is indeed my source? And that is God. Thus, the ultimate goal of yoga is indeed really to know God. To know God. And when we say know, of course, what do we mean by that? Well, I'm not going to go in depth into that because another sentence here, I am going to go very in depth. But for now, let me just say, the goal is indeed to know God. Thus, all different types of yoga are means for realizing Narayana. Thus, when we begin to practice yoga, we need to understand this, that if we are indeed practicing a form of yoga in which the goal is not to know God, if we're taking yoga from some specific yoga teacher or in some tradition where it is not stated outright, you are practicing this in order to know God, then we have to find a yoga system that will indeed deliver that goal to us. Yoga is to know God, to know Narayana. Let's go on now to the second sentence that is here. Narayana param tapaha. All austerities are aimed at achieving Narayana. So another very, very important second sentence of this very beautiful verse. All austerities are aimed at achieving Narayana. What does this mean? Well, generally speaking, there is no human being who doesn't engage in some sort of austerity in one way or another. Anyone who wishes to achieve something of importance engages in some sort of austerity. Think of when you were or are now maybe in school. Think of grade school, high school, college, graduate school. Think of yourself if you're someone who has achieved some sort of higher degree, like a PhD or MD or something like this. Well, it requires a tremendous amount of austerity. What does it mean to try to strive to achieve something great? Let's say that you are a business person. You've tried or you have succeeded in establishing a business. Or you simply work hard because your goal is to own a house, or just any sort of large goal like this. Well, in order to achieve anything of great importance, you must engage in austerity. That means self-sacrifice. That means you have to give of yourself. It means you have to work hard. It means that of the two paths before you, the easy one that leads to nothing or the harder one that leads to success, you choose the harder one that leads to success. And then, spiritually speaking as well, spirituality is itself a path of austerity, and let there be zero doubt about this. Individuals in the modern lazy West, in our culture of leisure and wanting everything quickly and wanting it now and cheaply, etc. People today especially have to understand that spirituality means self-sacrifice. It means rising above where we presently are and striving for something greater for ourselves. And that requires work, that requires discipline, that requires that we do, and that we often do things that are difficult. Meditation, at least initially, for example, is something that requires some difficulty on our part. To sit, and again, especially when we're beginning with meditation, to sit for a duration of time, half an hour, and to completely still the mind and be in absolute control over the mind, focusing first on breath and then finally on mantra, on the names of God, and focusing in such a way that our focus is never broken until we finally choose of our own free will to end our meditation and to open our eyes. That's austerity. That's something that's difficult. So thus, again, all human beings who strive for anything good, they have to engage in some sort of austerity. Well, what does Krishna say here? What does the Srimad Bhagavatam say here? All austerities are aimed at achieving Narayana. In other words, for every good thing, for every positive thing, for everything that is truly worth striving for that you can think of, ultimately all austerity should be dedicated to Him, should be dedicated to God. And this means certainly all spiritual austerity, but interestingly, even material austerity as well. For any good thing that we strive for, again, to give these examples, you want to become an MD, you want to become a PhD, or you want to get a bachelor's degree, you want to finish high school, you want to get a good job, start a business, etc. In doing all of these austerities, ultimately, the way that we transcendentalize our activities, including even our material activities, is in this way, that as we are engaging in these austerities, in addition to doing the austerities in order to achieve that immediate goal, in addition to this, let us dedicate those austerities to God, to Narayana, with the idea that He is the ultimate goal. So thus, with all the austerities that we do in our life, with every hard thing that we do, let's do those hard things with God consciousness, with Krishna consciousness, with the idea that I am doing this, even though it's seemingly a material thing, ultimately for God. And in this way, I transcendentalize my life. Thus, all austerities are aimed at achieving Narayana. Narayana Param Jnanam. This is the third sentence, or at least the first clause of the last sentence. Narayana Param Jnanam. And that is, the culture of transcendental knowledge is for getting a glimpse of Narayana. What is the culture of transcendental knowledge? What precisely is that? Well, this means, of course, what many of us are doing, and that is trying to acquire wisdom, trying to have an insight, a deep philosophical, but then ultimately experiential insight into both our own natures, who we are as Atman, as eternal living beings, but then ultimately of God, of ourselves as servants of the divine. That is what's meant by this culture of transcendental knowledge. Thus, the culture of transcendental knowledge is for getting a glimpse of Narayana. For any individual who considers themselves to be either an intellectual, philosophically inclined, a searcher of wisdom, etc. If we are engaging in such activities with merely at the idea of the knowledge itself being our end goal, even if we are engaging this activity for an idea so lofty as, oh, I wish to have knowledge for the sake of knowledge alone, which interestingly, several of the ancient Western philosophers, specifically Aristotle, felt that that was the highest thing that we could do. Seek knowledge for its own sake, seek virtue for its own sake, etc. Well, if that is our reason for engaging in the acquisition of wisdom, we are falling a little bit short. Because the truth of the matter is, again, the reason why we acquire wisdom is to ultimately know that being who is the fountainhead of all truth, of all wisdom, and that is Narayana, that is God. See, what is better? To read a book by a professor, to read some article by a professor, or to meet the professor firsthand with that article in hand that he wrote, with that book in hand that he wrote. And in addition to having that book knowledge, speak to the professor. Ask the professor questions. Ask the professor, what did you mean in this passage? In fact, can you go deeper? Can you answer even deeper than you ever could just in a book alone? And to know that professor intimately. Oh, now we're at the fountainhead of knowledge, not just a book. In the same way, it is one thing to acquire wisdom, but it is a very different thing to acquire a glimpse, to acquire an experience of that being who is the source of all truth, of all wisdom itself. So this is what this verse is saying, is that the very purpose of knowledge, of true knowledge, transcendental knowledge, is to know that source of all knowledge, which is Narayana. And then finally, Narayana Paragati. This is the very last line of the shloka. And that is, and ultimately salvation is entering the kingdom of Narayana. So this last clause, this last sentence, is extremely important. And in fact, I would argue it's the most important of all of these clauses that are here, of all of these sentences. The reason why this is the case is because it is pointing to what is the ultimate goal for us spiritually. For any living being who truthfully, honestly, sincerely, intelligently, with humility, wants to know truth. See, this is the problem, is that there are so many people, there are so many millions of people who, of course, want to be on the spiritual path, who claim that they want to know truth. Some of them sincerely so, some a little bit less so. But this is the ultimate thing that is of importance. Of all these many people, how many of these people who claim to be spiritual ultimately want to know that which is the highest? See, like everything else in this material world, in which, why are people in this material world? People are in this material world because they're in illusion. People are in this material world because they are self-centered, because they have put an artificial concept of themselves, that is ahankara, false ego, before their true self. Thus, as a result, even when it comes to spirituality, many people will approach the spiritual enterprise with ego, with a lot of ego. Thus, as a result, when they're so-called practicing spirituality, they're not necessarily looking for the highest. What are they looking for? Oh, a little bit of wisdom that will help them get by in life, or some interesting spiritual experience, a type of spiritual high, let's say, that they can enjoy, but then they don't have to commit anything more to. They're looking for maybe for some answers out of curiosity. In some very negative cases, some people are attracted to spirituality because they think that they can gain some sort of charisma, some sort of power that's there. They see it more as an occultic enterprise rather than an enterprise of self-surrender to that which is the absolute. So they want to gain mystic powers so they can impress other people and become famous, and thus probably end up doing very bad things to harm others. People have many different sorts of desires and motivations for why they enter the spiritual path. People are not all the same in their motivation for why they are quote-unquote spiritual. Well, of all the many different motivations, good and bad, that are there, the most important motivation for embarking on the spiritual path is one, and that is to know, to experience, and to surrender to that absolute, to God, to Srimad Narayana. This is the egoless approach. This is the approach that is most without illusion, without contrivance, without calculation, without selfishness whatsoever. Thus, this is why self-surrender, prapatti, is considered to be the highest, the most important activity that we can do in spirituality, because ego cannot be involved when we are surrendering our very selves to God. So thus, this is the ultimate reason why we are to practice spirituality, not for any lesser reason, but ultimately to know God. Thus, this ends in this way. And ultimately, salvation is entering the kingdom of Narayana. Now, several other important things to be said about this. Salvation. What is meant by salvation? Of course, what is meant is mukti, moksha, this idea of complete liberation from illusion, liberating ourselves from that which is not and fully embracing that which truly is. In other words, that which is eternal, that which is spiritual. And more, it's interesting how the Srimad Bhagavatam itself describes what is mukti, what is moksha, what is salvation. It doesn't say merging into God and losing your identity as an individual, independent unit of consciousness, as a personality. It doesn't say becoming nothingness. It doesn't say anything else. Rather, that ultimate salvation is entering the kingdom of Narayana. Thus, it's a very personal sort of vision of what ultimately moksha is. That is, we come to know God face to face. We do not lose our identity in God. We indeed surrender ourselves to God, but we retain who we are. And in that retaining who we are, we remain a personality in communion with that ultimate, that supreme personality of Godhead, who is Srimad Narayana, Bhagavan Sri Krishna. So this is the idea that the Srimad Bhagavatam itself, this Vedic literature, is telling us. What is, again, that ultimate salvation? It is to, in a personal way, enter Vaikuntha, enter into that realm of Narayana, that realm of God, to know God face to face, to surrender to God, to serve God for all of eternity, as free will beings, as personalities, knowing that supreme personality. This is the ultimate goal of all spirituality, and this is overtly the ultimate goal of Sanatana Dharma. And sadly, anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't understand Sanatana Dharma. However much they may sometimes a little bit seem to, they do not. Because again, this is what not only this particular verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam says, but multiple hundreds of verses in the Srimad Bhagavatam say similar things, as do thousands of verses in the totality of the other Vedic scriptures as well. This is the ultimate goal. Ultimate salvation is entering the kingdom of Narayana. And doing so, I would add, with bhakti, with devotional consciousness. Very good. So, beautiful verse. Again, for those who missed it, this is Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, verse 5. I'm sorry, chapter 5, verse 16. So, 2, 5, 16 of the Srimad Bhagavatam. With that, this is probably a good time to stop my talk, because we're only going to be doing this for an hour, and I want to see if there are any good questions that I can ask. And like last time, let me first apologize beforehand. We're not going to be able to get to every single question, not possible. I'm going to instead just try to find what seem like the most pertinent questions and do my very best to answer those. So again, at this point, if anyone has any questions, please feel free. And I recognize quite a few people here, not everyone, but I do recognize quite a few people. So welcome to all of you who are here. I'm very glad that you could all join us. Very good. Let me perhaps start with this first question that came in from Joel Jensen. And that is, how can I know that my guru will lead me down an authentic path and not lead me into New Ageism? This is a very good question. It's a very important question, actually. It's a basic question, only meaning that it's a foundational question. If one is starting on the path of spirituality, this is something that you need to ask yourself. And that is, if you are following a specific guru, how do you know that that guru who you are following is someone who is going to be teaching you authentic Vedic spirituality versus something that has the wrappings, the outer wrappings of Vedic spirituality, but then when you scratch beneath the surface a little bit, it's really just New Age concocted speculation, and there's nothing really spiritual about it? Well, again, it's a very good question, and let me try to answer that briefly. First of all, a person should not be following a guru unless they have first determined that. That's something that's very important. It's not a matter of you follow a guru who for some reason you like and then you hope for the best. No, that should not be the case. It should be the case that when you are searching for a guru, several things. First of all, it's important to understand that in searching for a guru, you are searching for something that is almost impossible to find today. And again, I'm someone who is very honest and open and blunt about this, as I am about everything that I teach. Everything that comes out of my mouth has to be truth, and it always is. So this is the first thing. The vast majority of individuals who call themselves gurus today, who, yes, they have YouTube channels, they put out books, they do seminars and whatever, satsangs throughout the world, the vast majority of them indeed are not authentic. The vast majority of them are indeed frauds. They are not true. To find an authentic guru is actually the rarest of things today. And that shouldn't be surprising. Today we're living not just in the Kali Yuga, but we're living in a very bad time of the Kali Yuga. As we know, where culturally, spiritually, in so many ways, things have become degenerated to the point where even spirituality, authentic spirituality, has become almost impossible to find. You know, it's all intermixed with all sorts of speculation and New Age commercialism and individuals attempting to just make a quick buck by selling a book or a seminar that seems like something spiritual. So this is the first thing. To find an authentic guru is very difficult, and if you find one, consider yourself the luckiest person in the world. So this is the first thing. Now, this begs the question, how do you know that an individual is an authentic guru before you even surrender to that person? And again, you know, to be very blunt, you find an authentic guru, you surrender to that person. You don't play games. That guru, if you find someone who is self-realized, who is enlightened, if you find someone who is authentic and who is telling you the truth, that person is not your buddy, your friend, your colleague. It's not someone who you can kind of take advice from once in a while when you feel like it. My Lord, you find such a person, you surrender to that person. But how do you know if that person is indeed authentic? Several ways. And to go much more in depth, please look at older video that we have on how to find an authentic guru. It's a video that you'll find on our YouTube channel that goes very in depth for close to an hour. But several things. First of all, if an individual claims to be a guru, number one, they have to have knowledge. And what does that mean? They have to have knowledge that is 100% based upon the revealed scriptures, upon Shastra, upon the Vedic scriptures. It's not enough for them to have merely factual knowledge that they picked up here and there, or they even got some sort of advanced academic degree, or they read a lot of books, so they can, they seem quantitatively to have a lot of knowledge. No, it has to be knowledge which, when they state it, it is non-different from the message that you will hear in the Vedic scriptures and the message that you have heard from authentic acharyas, gurus, and rishis from the past. So that's the first thing. They have to have knowledge, and it has to be real knowledge, not speculative. Second, they have to have the ability to teach that knowledge, because that's the nature of a guru. Guru means teacher. It's a person who teaches. So if they don't have the ability to convey that knowledge, which even if they have it, then that's not good. They have to be able to convey. The other thing is they have to be an individual who is experiencing that knowledge. In other words, they can't be a mere academic who can parrot something, even if it's true, but they themselves, they don't have any experience, they don't practice, they don't meditate, they don't have their own high degree of self-realization and God realization. No, they have to be an individual who has experience. Another thing, they have to be virtuous. And this is very important today, because there are so many, and every time I hear this, every time I hear about an instance like this, it just is terrible for me, just makes me extremely sad. They have to be individuals who are following morality themselves. What does that mean? If you have a so-called guru and the person smokes cigarettes on the side, they drink alcohol, they use drugs, they sleep around with multiple people, and on and on and on. If they are not capable of following ethics and morality themselves, they are a fraud. And more, and there are many, many more things, but I'm just going to end with this one thing because I know there are other questions. More, they have to be the sort of individual who can tell you the truth with every question, including what is the nature of New Ageism. You see, there are very few so-called gurus today who themselves will overtly denounce New Ageism, who will denounce Luciferianism, who will denounce ideas that are diametrically, ideologically opposed to the Siddhanta, to the philosophical conclusion of Sanatana Dharma. Very few so-called gurus are willing to do this today. Why? Because they want to avoid so-called controversy. And why do they want to avoid so-called controversy? You see, the gurus of the past didn't care about controversy. They cared about serving truth. Well, why is it that fake gurus always do everything possible? They bend over backwards. They will literally juggle the truth. They will do anything necessary to avoid controversy. It's because they don't want to lose their money stream. So a true guru doesn't care about a money stream. A true guru doesn't care about anything other than one thing. They state the truth. And that includes about the nature of the New Age ideology and any other ideology that is opposed to absolute truth, that is Sanatana Dharma. A true guru is courageous in speaking. That's how you know. So seek out such an individual, and then you won't have to worry about being led astray. So with that, let me see if there are any other questions that are here. Okay, I think I saw another very nice one here. This is a question from John. What is the best way today for someone to burn away false ego when they are trying to fully know God in the highest sense? All right, very nice. This is a very good question, and I'm going to answer this. First of all, as far as burning away false ego, this is the most difficult of things. This is, one could say, speaking via negativa, that is speaking negatively, that is of things that we need to eradicate in our lives. This is the most important and the most difficult of things, to eradicate false ego. We can eradicate many other sorts of anarthas, or different faults that we have in our character. If we have excessive anger or lust or anything like that. These are things which in time we can indeed overcome. But ego itself, well, this is the very foundation of our illusion. Because what is the nature of ego, or as Prabhupada would call it, false ego? It is because of false ego that we have fallen into the material plane of existence to begin with. It is the most subtle of personal elements that create what is called the human persona, the human person. So it's very difficult to annihilate. So number one, it will indeed take time. It's not something that happens overnight. In fact, it will take a very long time for most people. Of course, different people are on different stages of the path, but for most people, it will take quite a long time. The best way to eradicate false ego is to cultivate its opposite, and that is humility. Humility. So what is meant by humility? let's talk about that just for a short time. For too many people, it's unfortunate. When they hear the word humility, they tend to think humiliation. They tend to think, oh, what it means to be a humble person is, oh, I allow people to just abuse me and I never stand up for myself and I'm just very passive, very weak, etc., etc. No, that is not what is meant by humility. With true humility, in fact, what we see is that the opposite is the case. When a yogi is a truly humble individual, what that means is that they have embraced what is the truth of reality. That is, who and what they truly are in relationship with the entire universe. Humility is a very simple thing. It means knowing our place. That's simple. That's simple. You see, in the grand hierarchical structure of all reality, everyone and everything has its place, including God. And the place of God is at the highest, is at the pinnacle. All that humility means is understanding that, yes, oh, I may have talents, I may be whatever, very intelligent or good looking or this or that, but there are others who are better. There are others who are more intelligent. There are others who are less intelligent. And it means, very simply, having a realistic assessment of who I am. That's humility. That is humility. Once that is the case, you begin to embrace reality through humility. You begin to embrace the reality of who you are, first of all, in relation to all other beings as a result of this humility. More, as a result of this humility, you now begin to open yourself, both in your mind and in your heart, to God. See, what is false ego? I've described this several times in the past. False ego is like building a massive brick wall around our head. That's what false ego is. And as a result, we can't see anything. We can't see other people, thus they don't matter to us. We can't even see our own selves because there's a brick wall in front of me. I can't even see myself in the mirror, and I certainly can't see God, who is the sustainer of my very being. Thus, with humility, what we do is we begin to tear down that wall, brick by brick, that wall of false ego. And thus we come to the point where, indeed, we can see all. With true eyes, with spiritual eyes, we can see ourselves finally in the mirror. That's who I am. We can see others and not think that we are alone in the universe. That's egotism. You see, what is one of the definitions of egotism? Me, 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 that only I matter. I don't see others. Well, with humility, when we tear down that wall, now I realize, oh, there are other people in the world and they matter too. And I must treat them with compassion and with love and with consideration. But then ultimately, we also realize that there is God. So this is the very best way to conquer false ego, is through humility. Very good. Now I will look at some more of these questions. And thank you so much, everyone, for asking so many questions. There are so many questions here that I know I'm at no point going to be able to answer them all. So please just give me a moment to find something. All right. This looks like a good question, actually, that I believe I will answer. This is from Jenny Marie, and she asks, what can you recommend for former Christians who want to follow this path but are afraid of going to hell if they follow something other than Christianity? How can we overcome a fear like this? Very nice. This is a very, very good question, and I am definitely going to answer this. First of all, Jenny, if I may call you that, you have no reason to fear. And this is the reason why. If you pursue what in all sincerity God is revealing to you within your heart as the right path to follow, and if you're doing so, again, with humility, all sincerity, with devotion to God, wanting to truly know God and to surrender to God, then there's never anything to fear. Why would God punish us with the concept of hell or sending us to some hellish realm? Because we're simply, in all sincerity, following our heart to know Him. So this is something that's very, very important to understand, that is not the nature of God. God is not spiteful. God is not someone who will punish people for wanting to know Him. even if they make mistakes. And truthfully, spiritual people can indeed make mistakes in the path. That's what it means to be on this path. That sometimes you're going in the right way, sometimes you veer off a little bit, and out of sincerity, you just made a mistake, you come back. You see, our own parents would treat us better than the, let's say, fundamentalist sort of Christian idea of what is God. Our own parents, if we have good parents, if we have loving, wise parents, are not going to punish us because out of complete sincerity we wanted to do the right thing, but we weren't 100% sure, or we kind of veered off a little bit, but it was just a mistake. But now we're back and we understand, that I shouldn't have done that. I'm so sorry, I understand. Our own parents would not punish us. God is certainly not going to punish us. In the Vedic perspective, there is indeed the concept of hell, and let me be very frank and open about this. I've heard some Hindu leaders, quite literally, I don't know if they were lying or they were just ignorant. Some Hindu leaders will say, Hindus, the Vedic scriptures don't believe in heaven and hell. No, that's not true. There are thousands of verses about heaven and hell. Actually, we have names for the various regions of heaven and hell, but they are temporary. That's the difference. The Christian concept, of course, is the idea that if you commit some sort of sin, if you make a mistake, and if you don't accept Jesus as your Savior, that then God will punish you by sending you to eternal torment. That is the idea in the Abrahamic religions. However, that is not the idea in the Vedic concept. In the Vedic concept, there is certainly this world that is the Earth plane, and there are many different planets like Earth. There is a hellish region, there is a heavenly region. They're all temporary, you see, because God's kingdom is beyond even the heavens that are here within this material world. That is a transcendental realm entirely. But the idea is that we reincarnate throughout these various realms. Maybe we're in a hellish realm in one lifetime, then a earthly realm, then a heavenly realm, then back to an earthly realm, etc. But they're all temporary. The idea that God would create a place, a realm of eternal suffering because one of his children made a mistake, that is something that is inconceivable to a follower of Sanatana Dharma. So I would tell you to please not be afraid. The nature of God is love. Please never doubt that for a moment. The nature of God is love, and an unconditional love that is inconceivable. New Age people like to talk about unconditional love all the time, and they don't have a clue what that means. This is the nature of unconditional love, and the unconditional love that God has for us. God's unconditional love is such that he is with us at all times. He is there within our heart, even right now. Even at this exact time as I'm speaking to you live on YouTube, God is within your heart. God is within my heart. God is there as a silent, loving witness, seeing us at all times, at our worst and at our best. And he simply accompanies us as our best friend, and he accompanies us lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And he doesn't punish us. We often punish ourselves. See, that's karma. Karma is actually us punishing ourselves. Rather, he is there lovingly, patiently waiting for the time, whether it's in an hour, whether it's at the end of this lifetime, whether it's at the end of 10 lifetimes. He's waiting for that time when we finally, in humility, turn to him within our heart and realize that he is there and that he has been accompanying us lovingly all that time. Such is the nature of the love of God, that he is always with us and he never abandons us. This is God and the God of Sanatana Dharma. See, when from the Vedic context I am speaking of God, that's what I'm speaking about. And let me again be blunt about this. I'm not talking about the fundamentalist Christian God. I'm not talking about any other harsh idea of God that other religions might have. In Sanatana Dharma, God is not just the personification, but the very source of all love, of all compassion, and of all good. Surrender to that God, and let me assure you, Jenny, you will never have to fear. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, what is wonderful, the Bhagavad Gita ends with this. It's not quite the end verse, but it's really the end of Krishna's teaching to Arjuna, where he turns to Arjuna and he says, simply surrender unto me. I will deliver you from all negative reaction. And then he does something truly amazing. And this is the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. He raises his hand in Abhaya Mudra, the mudra of no fear, and he says, Ma Shuchaha, do not fear. This is the true God, a God who, rather than expecting you to be shaking in fear of him, a God who tells you to your face, do not fear. Do not fear. So I would welcome you, Jenny, to please explore the path of Sanatana Dharma as much as you can, because this is the path of love of God, which is known as bhakti, devotional consciousness toward God. Please watch all of our videos, all the videos that are coming. Please read the Bhagavad Gita. Please read my books, especially Sanatana Dharma, The Eternal Natural Way, which you can get either on Amazon or our website, dharmacentral.com. And please explore and practice this path as much as you can, and I assure you, you will never have to fear again. So with that, I'm sorry, and I truly am so sorry that we could not get to more questions. That is the nature, unfortunately, of these live streams, is that we can't get to all the questions. There are just too many of them, and it's my nature that I really, it's important to me to answer questions well and in depth and to truly give a satisfying answer. So of course I take a little bit of time answering these questions. I try not to just give quick, pat answers. But thank you so much for being here. We're going to end in just a minute. Let me just say, truly, actually, I really want to emphasize this. Thank you for being here. We're going to try to do this at least once a month or so. We will try to announce beforehand when we're going to be doing these live streams. Please try to be here in the future. Please support us in every way that you can. You know, as you can see, this work that we're doing is life-saving. It's life-saving. It is the most crucial work on the face of the earth right now, more than politics, more than any other form of spirituality, more than anything, more than any sort of charitable work. Our goal is to wake people up spiritually and thus to give them healing, the healing that they need, and to give them wisdom to make their lives happy. So please help us in every and any way that you can. Please help to publicize our channel, the Dharma Nation channel, on YouTube. We also have a channel on BitChute. It's called the Dharma Central channel. Please visit our website, dharmacentral.com. And this is the first time that I'm ever saying this on any video, so please bear with me. Yes, we have a movement, and it's a global movement to take exactly what you heard today and give it to the world. It's called the International Sanatana Dharma Society. It's a 501c3 religious nonprofit. We do not make a penny on any donation that we receive. I personally do not. I don't even receive a salary. We are in the midst, we just started actually our year-end fundraising campaign. Our goal is to raise $40,000, which is nothing for a religious movement, but that's our goal. And it's to help us with our temple here, to do some important repair work that we need, to continue to do all these things that we're doing, to buy more equipment that we need for all of our audiovisual projects, etc. If you can donate, please do so. You don't need to. A person does not need to donate to anything to know God. But if you find it in your heart to help the International Sanatana Dharma Society, please go to our website, dharmacentral.com. Look on the menu. You'll see a fundraising page that's on there, and you can donate. Please feel free to donate anything. Everything will help. You can donate $1, $100, $1,000, whatever you can. Every dollar helps. And I personally thank you for that. This is the first time, I believe, on any video I've ever asked or appealed for donations. But we want to expand what we're doing 1,000-fold. We want our audience to be 1,000 times bigger, because we know that these videos are healing people, and our books and everything that we're doing. So please help us in any way that you can. And until next time that we get together for another live stream, thank you very much for participating. And please take care of yourselves. Please continue on the path. And again, do not fear. Jaya Sriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Victory to Sanatana Dharma. And may we heal the suffering world. Thank you. Namaste.